This is a video to pick up some of the things I forgot in the earlier ones. So there will be some rambling and spots that should have been in the others. I apologize for that. I'm going to start in a way in the middle because we talked about tuning and how we adjusted pipe length. This particular tuning pipe is 5 inches long. Remember, there's 25.4 millimeters in an inch. The pipe will insert into the tube easily like this. This is about 1 3/4 inches, so that if you're using a 5-inch pipe, you're able to stretch the pipe out this far using the rubber tube, which are included in the order, without making a new tuning pipe. I recommend that you make each pipe starting at 5, 7, 9, perhaps 11. That way you can adjust all the way from this length, which is 5 inches, less 1 3/4, out to something like 10 additional inches. That should cover about everything you need to do in your testing. In this case, there's no rubber hose. It is usually needed, unless it's jammed up all the way tight, to prevent leaks. So I do recommend that you use the rubber hose, although in this particular case I'm not going to do it because it isn't really necessary at this length. Remember before I said if you make this out of wood and use wooden clamps and thumb screws, you'll have a very easy system for adjusting pipe length. So now I'm going to change and talk a little bit about the carburetor. When I talk about setting the needle valve, I'm talking about the high-speed needle valve. Now I've taken it off the remote, off of the mount, so that you can see that it doesn't really have to be mounted anywhere. I do recommend, however, that you don't mount it on the engine because of heat and vibration. Mount it somewhere else, like on the firewall or on the side of the fuselage, and try to keep it in a straight line between the fuel tank and the carburetor inlet. So, say, right there. The other part of the carburetor that occasionally needs to be adjusted is the what's called most often the idle needle valve. In the case of this engine, it's not really an idle needle valve. It's what I would call a mid-range needle valve. So it's already adjusted. You shouldn't need to turn it. If you do, make sure that you make a mark so that you can put it back, because it's likely that your adjustments are not going to help. If you're having trouble with the engine, I would look elsewhere. Again, you can adjust it, just make sure you can put it back where it was. If you do adjust it with the engine running though, use a long screwdriver. This is very dangerous, and using this screwdriver like this is much safer way to do it. I have a saying though, you've heard it before, when in doubt, don't. Don't change the carburetor. It's okay to change the high speed. You can do that all the time, and you will be. Don't change the carburetor. Now, pardon me while I go look at my list. What I've done is I've put a plug in here that is used. Now, the reason I want to demonstrate this is that as your plugs get older, they get what we would refer to as colder. And you can see this when you're running the engine. It doesn't hurt to use a used plug when you're doing your bench testing, because you're not too concerned about idling or mid-range or transition. But when you're flying, you need to make sure that you've got a good glow plug. So I'm going to demonstrate this quickly by starting the engine. And please observe me starting the engine because it's good practice. When I get it up to full throttle, it's going to be rich. Rich means extra fuel. And I'm going to take the glow driver on and off, and you're going to see the RPM change when I take it on and off. Then I'm going to put in a good plug and repeat that, and you'll see much less or maybe even no change. This engine stopped with the piston up toward the glow plug. If that happens, don't reach down and touch the prop. Wait until the engine cools down and make sure that the glow driver is removed, because sometimes it can backfire and cause injury. Now it should be cold enough for me to move it off the top dead center. We're lucky that that happened, because I didn't think about telling you that. It is dangerous though, and you need to be careful. Now I'm going to switch to a different glow plug, one that's not so old, and let's see how it does. That was a particularly good test because it actually worked. Sometimes you'll get fooled. But you notice that there was no RPM change. Now, I'm going to cover one more thing as far as starting. The first time you start it, and pay attention here, the first time you start it, make sure the needle valve is open. And that's going to be like 7 turns from close. So close it all the way down and then open it about 7 turns. That means it's going to be really rich. Now, if I use the word rich, I mean extra fuel. Also, if I use the word lean in, that means turn the needle valve clockwise and it screws in, reduces the fuel, and in model airplane terms, leans in. If you rich up, that means turn it the other way. Sorry, it's confusing. That's just what we say. So you lean in, you rich up. demonstrated two things. One, leaning in until I got peak RPM. So we talked about that before. Then I reached up until it dropped a couple of thousand RPM, and I demonstrated the pinching of the fuel line trick. Now, one little benefit is to make sure that your fuel tank is almost full all the time when you run a test, because that means that this will happen much quicker than it did that time. Right now my 16-ounce tank is only about half full, so it took a while for the engine to adjust the pressure and lean itself in. So let me check my notes again. Okay, when you're done for the day, don't kill the engine the way I did by shutting the throttle. What you do is you disconnect the fuel anywhere. I'm going to disconnect it straight from the carburetor. With the throttle fully open, you crank it dry or run it dry. That removes all the raw fuel from the engine. Raw fuel is your enemy. It will cause rust. You can fill it completely full of after-run oil, which people will recommend. That's not the trick. The trick is running all the fuel out of the engine. If you store it for a few days or a few weeks or a few hours with raw fuel, you're going to have a problem. Always run dry. Keeping the carburetor tight, this is what we refer to as a nut driver. Happens to be 1/4 of an inch. Sorry for you metric people. 1/4 of an inch is slightly bigger than 6 millimeters. I usually say that the carburetor tightening screw needs to be as tight as you can get it with a nut driver. It needs to be tight. This particular nut and this particular nut shouldn't have to be adjusted. The other thing is tightening the head bolts. Sometimes when you get hot, and I'll be including wrenches for you, when you get hot, sometimes they get loose. So always check the head bolts. We recommend about 16 inch-pounds. You can do the conversion yourself, but check the head bolts regularly. Looks like that includes everything. I hope you have fun.